When 5 retired Marines showed up in full-dress uniform at a suburban daycare, the staff froze, and one was fired on the spot. A Vietnam vet had been humiliated, denied his grandson for looking unstable. Cameras were rolling, tensions exploded, but what happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. But first, let's go back to the beginning. Tom Delaney didn't sleep that night. He sat at his modest kitchen table, its formica edge worn smooth by years of use, a cold mug of black coffee untouched before him. The house was quiet except for the soft ticking of the wall clock and the occasional creak of old floorboards settling. The silence didn't bother him. He was used to quiet, the kind that settled over fire base bunkers in the jungle after a firefight, the kind that followed funerals, the kind that curled around you when you'd outlived too many of your brothers in arms. But this quiet seethed. The dismissal at the daycare played over in his mind like a broken reel. It wasn't just a snub, it was a kind of erasure. He had survived rice paddies, sniper fire, the slow erosion of his knees and hips, the mental minefields of returning home to a country that once spat on him in uniform, and now he was being treated like a threat for showing up for his grandson. He thought of Lucas, small hands smudging the window, a red-faced cry pressed against the glass. That image pierced deeper than any shrapnel ever had. Tom reached for the manila envelope Amanda had given him weeks ago, the one with every document the daycare had requested. Photocopies of his ID, the signed pickup authorization form, a letter from Amanda notarized at the hospital. He had gone through every hoop they'd asked for. The rules were followed, the procedures met. But it hadn't mattered, because someone like Susan Mather had seen the limp, the old military cap, and had made a snap decision. Unfit, untrustworthy, unwanted. He pulled out a notepad and wrote down everything. The exact time he arrived, what Susan had said, her refusal to look at the paperwork. Tom wasn't a man of many words, but when he needed to be precise, he could recall things with surgical clarity. In the core, a lapse in memory meant a lapse in survival. When he was done writing, he set the pen down and stared at the notepad. His hands trembled slightly, not with age, but restraint. The last thing he wanted was to cause trouble. Amanda didn't need more stress. But this was different. This was about dignity, about respect, and about a little boy who just wanted to see his grandpa. He glanced across the room at the faded photo on the wall, him and 2 Marines standing in ankle-deep mud, arms slung around each other, grinning despite the rain. One of them, Mac, had once told him during a long night in a foxhole, "The day we stop standing up for what's right is the day we stop being Marines." Tom stood, knees cracking like dry twigs, and walked slowly to the garage. He flicked on the light. The far wall was covered in neatly arranged tools, the same care he had learned maintaining weapons and gear in the field, now applied to lawnmowers and socket wrenches. He moved past the workbench and opened a drawer. Inside, wrapped in a soft cloth, lay a handful of service medals. He hadn't looked at them in years, didn't need to. He didn't carry his worth in hardware. But some people needed reminding. He closed the drawer gently, a plan forming, not for revenge, but for reckoning. Because there's something about Marines. They never back down from a fight worth having. The morning air was crisp, the kind that stung the lungs and sharpened the senses. A thin veil of mist hung low over the asphalt outside Little Star's daycare, curling like breath from a dragon's nostrils. Inside, the staff bustled as usual, coffee brewing, toys being disinfected, cartoon songs humming faintly from a classroom speaker. But the mood shifted when Susan Mather glanced out the wide front window and saw them. 5 men, weathered but unyielding, in full Marine dress blues. Their presence wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was the silence that unsettled. The unspoken weight of medals, of years etched into the lines of their faces, of discipline that hadn't rusted with age. They weren't angry. They were resolved. At the front stood Tom Delaney. He wasn't hiding the limp now. He wore it like a ribbon. His jacket was immaculate, pressed so sharply it looked like it could cut glass. Silver star above the left pocket. Purple heart beside it. Beneath the ribbons, a subtle glint in his eyes that hadn't been there the day he walked away in defeat. Susan stepped out with forced cheer. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" Tom spoke calmly. "You already did." The others flanked him. Mark Grissom, tall as a tree trunk and twice as solid, stood to his right. He gave Susan a look she couldn't quite decode, half disdain, half pity. "We're here for clarity," he said, "and respect." Susan crossed her arms. "This is a private facility. You can't just—" Tom raised a hand. "No one's here to cause a scene, just here so the truth gets its due." Behind them, parked neatly across the curb, was Amanda's car. She stepped out, her hospital scrubs wrinkled, but her expression surgical, focused, razor sharp. In her hands, a file folder thicker than a phone book. She walked past the Marines, unfazed by the onlookers who had begun to gather, neighbors, parents, staff peering nervously through the blinds. "I've contacted the county board," she announced, "and the local news, also a civil rights attorney." Susan blinked. Amanda dropped the folder on the front desk inside. "Here are timestamps, emails, signed pickup forms, video stills. My father's background check is cleaner than most priests. And these gentlemen? They're not here for drama. They're here because you treated a decorated combat veteran like a criminal." Tom said nothing. His silence said everything. Mark stepped forward, voice calm but firm. "You judged a man by a limp and a hat. Not by his record, not by his actions. You made him invisible because his presence made you uncomfortable. That ends today." Susan stammered, trying to find her footing. "We're just trying to keep children safe." "From who?" Amanda snapped. "A grandfather? A man who's carried the weight of this country so you could sip lattes in peace?" Tom placed a hand on Amanda's arm. He didn't need fire. He had steel. Then he stepped to the front door and gently but deliberately placed a framed photo on the daycare's welcome table. It was a picture of him holding Lucas, both of them laughing under a tree in his backyard, the boy wearing Tom's oversized Marine cap. He turned to Susan. "You don't have to like me, but you will respect that boy's right to know his grandfather, and I won't be erased." And with that, he stepped back, standing shoulder to shoulder with his brothers, unyielding as granite. The message was clear. This was no protest. This was a formation. The Virginia morning sun, golden and low, cast long shadows across the pavement as the quiet storm reached its crescendo. The 5 Marines stood immovable, like monuments carved from the stone of their own history. The air was thick with tension, not the chaotic kind, but the slow, heavy burn of injustice being dragged into daylight. Inside the daycare, curtains twitched. Whispers leaked from behind doors. The children didn't know what was happening, but the adults did, and for the first time, they couldn't look away. Susan Mather burst from the front entrance like a firecracker with a short fuse. Her voice carried too loudly, brittle with panic. "This is completely inappropriate. You're intimidating the staff, and now there are cameras?" She waved her hand wildly at the small cluster forming at the sidewalk. Neighbors, parents, and 2 local reporters, their cameras already rolling. A quiet, stone-faced man with a phone on a gimbal captured every second for his TikTok veteran channel. Mark didn't flinch. "You think this is a scene?" he said, voice low and steady. "No, ma'am. A scene is what you caused when you humiliated a veteran in front of his grandson and treated him like a liability instead of family." Susan turned to Amanda with disbelief. "You brought media here? You weaponized this?" Amanda didn't blink. "No, you did. When you ignored my emails, discarded legal forms, and told your staff my father looked unstable, you judged a war hero by the way he walks and by the uniform he wore." She paused, then raised her voice for the cameras. "My son's grandfather isn't unstable. He's unshakable. He carried wounded Marines through enemy fire and came home with medals and nightmares, and all he asked for was the right to pick up his grandson, his family." Susan opened her mouth again, but before she could spin another excuse, a second voice emerged, trembling, but firm. "I need to speak." Everyone turned, It was Mr. Hensley, the daycare center's director, who had rarely been seen outside his office. He stepped forward, pale, his suit too loose on his frame. His voice cracked with the weight of responsibility. "I've reviewed the records," he said, "and everything Amanda Delaney submitted was correct. Tom Delaney was lawfully authorized. What happened was a failure of judgment, not policy." He turned to Tom directly. "Mr. Delaney, on behalf of this facility, I apologize, not because you're a veteran, but because you are a grandfather who was wronged." A hush fell over the crowd. Then Hensley faced Susan. "Effective immediately, you are relieved of duty." Gasps rippled. Susan's mouth dropped open. "You can't be serious. This isn't about opinion anymore," Hensley said. "It's about accountability." But Tom, still quiet, stepped forward. His eyes swept across the faces, some defiant, some ashamed, some hopeful. He didn't raise his voice, didn't lecture. He just looked into the camera and spoke like a man who had stood watch on darker nights than any of them could imagine. "I didn't come here for apologies or revenge," he said. "I came for my grandson, and I came to remind folks that wearing a uniform doesn't make you dangerous. It means you swore to protect the people who think you are." He paused. "We don't want thanks. We want decency, a chance to live, to serve, even in small ways, because when the war ends, the duty doesn't." It wasn't just a statement. It was a reckoning. Within hours, the footage barkaged online. Hatchet Grandpa Marine exploded across platforms. Veterans from every state posted their own stories of quiet dismissal and unseen service. The moment ignited something raw and overdue. A conversation about dignity, about respect, about who we let near our children and who we unjustly push away. And the next Wednesday, when Tom returned to Little Star's daycare, he didn't walk in alone. He was met by a standing line of staff at the door, teachers, assistants, even the cook, each offering a crisp, solemn salute. Lucas sprinted across the lobby. "My hero's here!" he shouted, his voice echoing with pride. Tom picked him up, eyes wet, lips curved in a humble smile. This time, no one looked away. This time, the uniform wasn't feared. It was honored.